Welcome to Reanimated, everybody. This is episode 306. My name is Stuart. I am in California. We're also joined this morning by one Kyle Diaz up in the beautiful green state of Washington.
Hi, Stuart. Yes, I am indeed in Washington, and it is green. Thanks for having me back.
Started to backslide into Oregon, but I'm glad that I landed on the right state.
Pacific Northwest.
And coming at us from the much later in the day East Coast is the inimitable H.A. Conrad in New York. How are you?
I'm great and no less sleepy, and I'm drinking some coffee. It's a fantastic morning.
Well, we're here on Reanimated. Always glad when Kyle can join us. And since he was the one who said, "Oh, hey, just guess what? Midnight Mass. I banged it all out in one sitting," is kind of what you made it sound like, even if that's not true, Kyle. We were like, okay. So all the better that you can be along for some of this review or recap series we're doing. So thank you for being here.
Excited to dive into it with you guys because I really enjoyed it, and I was excited when you decided to cover it on the show.
Have you heard our first two episode Lamentations?
So I caught up with your initial thoughts and impressions, and I kind of forgot how. I know we're supposed to get into news and stuff, but I forgot how slow of a burn it was. So I appreciate you sticking with it until the reanimation starts, because there's not a lot of reanimating those first two episodes.
We're fans, I think, of a little slow burning here and there. Yeah, but yeah. So like you said, there is some news. So we'll bang it out. We will proceed with the news. HA, do you have any, have you read this AV Club article that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are really, I'm not shocked that this is something that Netflix did greenlight, but they basically have given the go ahead for a prequel to Army of the Dead, and then also a sequel of it as well. And basically it was, look, it was where it was. It was a good monster film in the middle of summer. It didn't take itself too seriously. And I'm not shocked to see that they do this, but apparently people get like really worked up about it. But
there was a whole bevy of other products associated with that film, even before it came out. Like the animated sequel series, I think, is also one of the things that we have yet to see anything of. But Army of Thieves is actually on Netflix now, I think, as of yesterday, maybe.
Yeah.
I have not taken the time to watch it, but I did find the indignance of this AV Club article headline to be the funniest, which was, why the hell did Netflix greenlight a zombie light?
Really mad about it.
They wanted more zombies, and I get it.
I do too, but it's also like, I don't know, like as anybody, like that's the biggest part of a budget, is to do that kind of makeup. And look, they were teasing Army of the Dead we had been talking about it for so long before it even finally came out. And I just don't, generally with these kinds of things, they want to get things out as quickly as possible. And that's certainly not going to be a huge budget for it. They just want it out and packaged and done. And I suspect that's probably what happened here. And also, since it's a prequel, you're not going to have quite as much monster action anyway, because it's a story leading up, right? So, but anyway, I'm still going to watch it and I'll certainly watch the sequel.
Apparently there's a little more, a couple more tidbits released by Snyder that suggested that the sequel, Planet of the Dead, could feature the character of Dieter, which seems a little unlikely because it seemed like he was pretty dead at the end of the first film.
And I didn't see that there was a possibility of. Well, I guess we'll find out.
I guess we will.
Army of the Dead wasn't really my cup of tea, but it was phenomenally successful for Netflix by all accounts.
But you just hate aliens reimaginations? Is that what's happening?
I think that is like an example of like an idea, like a concept in a screenplay that is like 100% tonally unsuited to its director. Like basically there are so many people who would have had so much fun with that concept, and then there's Zack Snyder, where like fun and like it's not exactly his wheelhouse. And so I just think it like,
well, so we've talked a bit about Zack Snyder, and I do think that he gets too much. I think people love to hate him.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think visually he does a really good job at certain things, but I do think that he always needs somebody else to balance him out.
Yeah.
And I think that probably would have been a little better here, because I just, I think he took an idea and sort of like did his Zack Snyder thing. But overall, I still like him. He still produces stuff. He gets stuff out there, so I can't be too upset about it.
Mhm.
I think, one of my biggest things with him is that it's sort of like, even with like Dawn of the Dead, it's like he gets certain things so right and then just destroys everything else. And I think this was a very good example of such a thing. But overall, I did enjoy this for what it was, which was a ridiculous, insane set piece of a zombie film.
Yeah. I just think I was sitting there being like, Army of the Dead, as imagined by like Edgar Wright, would be just like such a different feel than this movie. Although I did like the Snyder cut of the Justice League, and I think he is a really visually, talented director. So, but
I am, speaking of Edgar Wright, I am very excited about the fact that I think he's producing, I don't think he's directing, but Lockwood and Co. I don't know when it's going to come out, but it's supposed to be at some point this year. And this is one of my favorite ridiculous, like, I guess YA, not quite. I don't know. They term them as children's books, but I don't know that they're quite children's books. I think you'd have to be a very specific type of child to not be scared by some of the themes in these books. But it's kind of like a steampunk London paranormal ride. So we'll have to stay tuned for that. Hopefully, it won't be terrible. It might be Amazon, not Netflix. So,
well, either way, we'll keep an eye out. Anything Edgar Wright does is worth looking at the very least. Also out there was a Variety article this week highlighting an upcoming zombie film called Summer Hit by an auteur named Pablo Stoll. I have zero background on either Pablo Stoll, this film. I mean, one of the interesting things, it's being production is based, I think, in Uruguay.
Yeah, Uruguay. Yep, on the beaches, and then I think they're also
it's set in Latin America, so it's going to be that'll be different at the very least.
Yeah, I saw a couple of stills from it, and it does look like it's fun to shoot. so we'll see how it goes. But it is the director is terming it as a beach apocalypse that can't be escaped, like those catchy summer songs, hence the name. So yes.
Okay.
So we'll have to see what comes from this. But it looks, I tried to look up a few stills after this, we saw this article, and I didn't find anything other than like sort of the boring filming part of it as opposed to anything else. But we'll have to keep an eye on it and see what happens. I'm definitely game to watch it.
Finally, last week I probably should have brought this up, but actually I don't remember which day it was. No, it was there were a couple weeks ago, or last weekend, GalaxyCon took place. I believe it was virtual, and one of the panels was a Q&A with members of the cast from Black Summer. And this was a nice mixed bag of cast members, including Velez from season 1, and then a lot of people like Brathwaite, Boone, Mance, Lance, and Zoe Marlette, who plays Anna in season 2 and 1. So it was a bit of a Q&A. It's 45-ish minutes long, and we'll have the link in the show notes, but there were some kind of interesting, what was your craziest day on set stories, which it sounds like, and especially after the news about the movie Rust being filmed, without Baldwin and everything, that tragedy, there were a lot of stories about people getting injured on set. And I know also with the backdrop of the IATSE striking, and they're trying to get better working conditions on sets. A lot of these stories kind of rang against that sort of backdrop to me, where people were just getting injured, and not necessarily because there wasn't like an emphasis on safety. They tried to make that clear, but just because these are crazy scenes they're shooting. And Kyle, have you seen Black Summer both seasons?
I haven't, actually. The only reason I know about it is because I think I saw the episodes where you covered it kind of scroll past in my podcast player, but I have not. I don't know anything about Black Summer at all.
Then we shouldn't say too much.
We're not going to get into it other than to say I'm not shocked that there were injuries and things like that. And I will say that the Rust the tragedy on the rest set, I just think that this is unbelievably avoidable. Like it just total avoid. It can be avoided, but I have heard from a lot of my friends in the industry, especially with COVID and some of the things that have been going on. This is always like if people are acting as if this just happened because of the pandemic, these kinds of situations on set, and that's not true. People who work in the industry often are asked to do things in very poor working conditions. It just happens that this particular tragedy was with a really well-known actor. And I think
well, and a well-known director of photography, like just
well, it's that too, but I think if it hadn't been him, it wouldn't be quite as loud. But if it highlights and helps and even prior to this, there has been a lot of demands by the union of different. It's like I forget the name of the union, but this
IATSE.
is like
It's IATSE.
yes, asking for more breaks, better hours, like all sorts of things, because that has not been happening for years. So, look, if it, I'm very sorry that this tragedy happened, but especially with a thing like this, like Black Summer, and you and I even talked about how difficult some of these scenes must have been to shoot because you'd have to do them. I don't think you could do them as many times over as you'd probably need to. And there was a lot of movement, a lot of danger. And this definitely confirms that. Although I do think that they did an excellent job and it sounds like people had fun, but they were not, I mean, there's no question that this was a pretty difficult set just for environmental reasons, in addition to all the crazy stunts and things like that going on.
Kelsey Flower was also on the panel and talked about how much running he had to do. He told some stories that I've heard before about how, like being told just to run to the horizon by the director, which is hilarious. And the guy who played Mance, Jesse Lipscomb, who also had a lot of running in the season 2 finale, also talked about how he broke a rib during the shooting of those scenes and broke the nose of one of the stuntmen he was hitting with an axe. Like who he hit him a little too much, I guess. But yeah, the crazy stuff. But they're being asked to film these extremely dynamic shots. So well, either way, take a look at if you're interested in Black Summer and you want to get to know some of these actors behind these characters a little better. The dude who played Brathwaite, Bashir Sylvan, is just really has a lot of really funny stories.
And Kyle, you should definitely watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing series. Now you've got 2 seasons of it, but it's a little bleak.
It is, but I'm kind of jealous that he has 2 series to watch, and I keep recommending it to people, and they keep coming back to me. Really, like I can't, like you were totally right. That was great, especially the 2nd season.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check it out.
We don't know if there's going to be a 3rd season yet. I don't think it's been greenlit, but it was several weeks after season 1 that they approved the 2nd season. So I'm hoping that pressing my thumbs, as they say in Germany.
Well, I mean, if they did it for Army of the Dead, one would hope, right?
Well, that came out, that was born fully realized into a multi-level marketing campaign. So also in the news of Black Summer cast members, Kelsey Flower's single dropped this week. It's called Run Louie Run, and it's good. And then
goodness,
Christine Lee, who plays Sun, also has a single that came out, I think, in the last week or so, and they're very different styles of music. Hers is kind of poppy and his is a little folky. But I listened to 1 or 2 of her other songs last night, and the one that actually was the most amazing was about her cat called Pierre. And let me see if I can find what it was called. Kitty Kitty Pierre.
Oh goodness.
It's a very funny song. So yeah, I would recommend to anybody who still wants to get to know the cast of Black Summer even more, go listen to their music. Kelsey Flower, who played Lance, and Christine Lee, who played Sun, both have new tracks out. And Kitty Kitty Pierre is just a funny song. But with those bits of, I'll put the news in air quotes out of the way, we can get to our recap of episodes 3 and 4 of Midnight Mass. and it was hard to not keep watching after episode 4. I'll tell you that much. But I've held true.
I didn't.
Oh, you spoiled your appetite?
I did. I just binged the rest of it. I just couldn't help myself.
H.A. Conrad. What are we going to
We
do
were
with
having
you?
this conversation in person, HA, and I could just exchange knowing glances occasionally when Stuart's talking, because we have knowledge that he does not.
I don't. And so, okay, try to keep it straight.
Yep.
I will. I think I can do it. So
well, let's get a little background from Kyle on why this show. What brought you to this show, and did you actually watch it all in one sitting, or how were you able to consume it?
I didn't watch it all in one sitting. I binging for me these days means basically watching an episode a night until it's done. That's the closest I get to binging. When
so bingy.
don't have 8 hours anymore with kids around to just like bury myself in something anymore. But I got into this show because I am a huge Mike Flanagan fan. I have been following his career for a long time, since a movie called Absentia that he made back in like 2010, 2011, that I really enjoyed. I really loved Oculus. He made a great Ouija movie, which is just insane to me. Dr. Sleep, I have really been a fan of his for a long time, and I was a particular fan of Haunting of Hill House, the first season, which I just absolutely loved and have actually kind of rewatched multiple times because I enjoy it so much. That said, I also think that in addition to being a really talented horror director, Flanagan is also kind of frustrating in certain ways. He has a little bit of an incorrect story sense sometimes, and so like he does things that frustrate me at the same time. But overall, I think he's just a really, really talented director, and kind of along with like maybe a couple of other people, one of the most consistently excellent horror directors working today. And I think Midnight Mass is kind of the most Flanagan-y of all the things that he's made, and that's kind of like for good and for bad, as we'll probably get into over the course of the next couple episodes.
I would agree with you in that I think he is an excellent director. I think he's probably one of the better ones out there. And I do generally like what he does. But I have a couple of criticisms in terms of the storyline, and sometimes what I feel is a kind of almost like a want to hit you in the face with a specific idea or philosophy rather than be subtle about it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Is that hitting without giving too much away, obviously?
Yeah, I think he kind of indulges in Midnight Mass more so than anywhere else in his passion for the monologue, which works in some places and is incredibly affecting, and then in other places just totally is a bore, and I just kind of like check out. Yeah.
And in this specific episode that we're about to talk about, I think that there is an example of this. So, and it's something that I feel is a sloppy narration or a sloppy way of storytelling, because rather than, one of the things we were just talking about, Midnight Mass, which is a very, very different storytelling style. There is very little dialogue, but you get an idea and a very good idea of what's happening without it being hand fed to you. And one of the things and he doesn't do it all the time, but in this, he does definitely indulge in it quite a bit throughout this series. And it gets almost worse as we get further into the series. But he indulges in that way of storytelling. And to me, that's really not, I don't want to say it's not trusting your audience, but it's not it's a very lazy way of getting a story across and filling in background, as opposed to doing it in a more artful way.
I think I'm picking up that you didn't enjoy The Confession. Is that what we're talking about?
It's not that I didn't enjoy it, because I think I think that it was fine. But I think it was so I will admit that when this piece started, I was like, oh no, is he going to go further down the road with this way of story? Is this what he's going to do? And I was correct. But, yes, that's the main thing I'm talking about here.
Mhm.
I liked aspects of it because I do think that, he's definitely, I think he's really trying to create a profile, an idea of Father Paul / Pruitt. And there's, this is certainly a way to do that. But I think that it would have been more interesting if somehow he was confessing to a real person. This is just him talking and kind of just talking and filling in the blanks about what happened to him.
Yeah, I could see how that could be a little frustrating.
I have a dumb question from a non-Catholic. Who do priests confess to?
Other
Priests?
Mhm.
Okay. I guess there is no other priest on
It's
the
like
island.
shrinks have to get therapy from other shrinks.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But honestly, even in if there is, in times of war and like under dire circumstances, you can make a confession, and this is pretty much everybody. And it's not necessarily, there is like a big deal where it's like, oh, if you don't get your last rites or whatever, like has to be a priest. But that's not always, there's always like dispensation for dire circumstances. So they may be trying to play that up here. But they also are straying quite a bit from Catholic like dogma in this specific show, and I think very much deliberately so. But anyway,
so this episode called Proverbs starts with the confession, right? It's kind of like a flashback, I guess, or to Father Hill going into the confessional and talking about Monsignor Pruitt's health when he went to Jerusalem and how he was much worse than anybody thought. And there's like this shot of him on the Wailing Wall losing his marbles.
Right. But this was also, this is like, just to remind everybody from the last episode, Lisa, he had basically, it seemed as if he had healed her. So she stood up, and there is definitely that sort of that vibe going on, like something about like they know something's going on, right?
Yes, I believe everybody knows something is going on at this point. He also has like staggered out of church after this miraculous healing, and when Bev comes to check on him, she also then just starts freaking out about something that's on his wall that we don't get to see till later. But then everybody seems to be unable to look away from for the rest of these couple episodes.
And I feel like they give a lot to the thing on his wall because it's not very clear. Anyway,
especially when they zoom way in, and you're
like, oh, I guess you could make that
if you squint, it looks like him. Newsprint, as you might know, does not always make for the best photos, especially in that style. It's just like blobs. Yeah.
But there's a lot going on in the island, before we get to his big old confession and background.
Well, that's played out like, in dribs and drabs over the episode. The first things that start to happen are Lisa and her parents go to the doctor. And I found this to be actually kind of a really fascinating scene, especially mostly because when she's like, well, we should go to the mainland and get more tests. And her father is like, we rent the house we used to own, and we're poor, basically we're broke. And then there's also the element of, we also don't want to question this miracle because this came from God and yada, yada, which I'm less interested in. But the fact that the mayor, and I don't know what he or his wife actually do for a living, but the mayor is like, I'm broke. I've put all my money into medical expenses.
I mean, the whole town is kind of broke though, with the oil spill and, brain drain and people leaving and all that kind of stuff. It's and it's all gone to Bev and the church, right? And that part of the narrative, I think, is established. But the fact that usually in narratives, I feel like the mayor is considered a well-to-do. So it's also very telling about this community that he's actually broke too, because of his personal stuff, and probably because Bev is just a manipulative, horrible parasite. And we haven't seen how wealthy she is, but I assume she has just like some sort of sick crib on the island.
Maybe, but there's also other stuff related to her that makes me question that. But we can, we'll talk about Bev a little bit more later, but in this, like especially the beginning, we see a lot with Lisa and her family and sort of what's been happening with after her healing. And I do think that the scene between like she actually goes and confronts Joe, who is the person that shot her. And it is a rough scene. Like a really rough scene.
I thought the guy playing Joe Colley does a pretty fantastic job here.
Yeah.
He's amazing. And we talked about kind of like some places where like the kind of emotional rawness and the monologuing tendency doesn't work, and this is a place where it like totally does work. I thought this was such a great emotional scene between the two of them. And
when I say it's a rough scene, I mean it's really well done in that it's hard to watch and you can understand the pain on both sides.
Yeah.
And like the devastation that this has caused to both of them. And it starts out one way and takes a really big turn. Like, so, which sets up some things later on with Joe. But I thought that these two did such a fantastic job together. Really. And again, this is one of the strengths of the series. And in fact, I think Mike Flanagan does an incredible job at casting, the cast that he ends up with, and lots of people you'll see make appearances in a lot of his different projects, and this is no exception. These two really just do such a great job.
I was going to ask Kyle, since you've seen so many of his projects, do you see a lot of the same people over and over again? I understand that Aaron Green, the actor who plays Aaron Green, is in a lot of his stuff, but are there other familiar faces in this?
Yeah, Kate Siegel, who plays Aaron Green, is his wife and is in pretty much everything he's done, going way back to a movie called Hush that he made like in 2015, I think. But Joe, that actor, I forget his name, is also in Haunting of Hill House, and the sheriff is also in Haunting of Bly Manor. He tends to work with a lot of the same folks over and over again. Oh, the doctor was also in one of his prior works. I can't remember which one. Definitely, he's one of those kind of like has a rotating cast of folks that he's working with all the time.
I mean, we see this too with people like, oh God, what's his first name? James Gunn?
Oh, I thought you were going to say Wes Anderson.
And Wes Anderson, like auteur type directors, I guess, who bring this like little flock of actors with them. And it's an interesting way to see these different performances out of the same people. And I'm just curious, if you're seeing anything that's really been standing out to you with this series versus the other things you've watched of Flanagan's.
The actor who plays Joe is phenomenal in Haunting of Hill House, but he's better here. And then I would say Rahul Kohli, who plays the Sheriff Hassan. I think he was a warmer and more like charming character in Haunting of Bly Manor, and I miss some of that warmth in his performance here because his interactions with his son are so cold, and I think that's part of who the character is supposed to be, but I think it also keeps me a little bit from connecting with him a little bit. So I think he's still doing a good job, but I don't connect with his performance quite as much as I did in Haunting of Bly Manor. Also, he has a terrible accent.
He flips too. He slips quite a bit.
Just let him be English.
I know. I was like, just let the poor guy be British, but I understand why they didn't want him to be here. But
playing Ollie also has a little tiny bit of an accent. I'm just like, look, these guys both obviously want to speak in a different way than you're making them. Can you please just let him do it?
Of course, Henry Thomas is also in almost everything he's done for a long time. Who plays?
And is that Father Hill?
That's the father of Riley.
It's E.T. It's E.T.
Henry Thomas. Yeah. So that name just means nothing to me, Henry Thomas. But if you say E.T., then I know.
No, I think this is his first time working with Hamish Linklater.
Okay.
I love Hamish Linklater, though. I think he's awesome. But I also agree. Like, I think Rahul Kohli is, and he was in iZombie too. And like, I do think he's a pretty versatile actor, other than the accent piece. But he's, very capable of showing that, being like that warm, likable character. And I think in this case, it's deliberately being used to set him apart from everybody, not just including his son. And I agree, though, that it makes it much harder to connect and to empathize with him.
I felt like there was a fair amount of empathy. I mean, I get it. Like the scene in this episode where he's telling Ali why he doesn't need to go to church to see what's going on at St. Patrick's. I felt like that was a super interesting scene and some like great dialogue, but it felt heartfelt, if a little cold, I guess. But it also, he was emotionally available in that scene. I didn't feel like he was kind of unavailable to Ali. Ali, if anything, is just a little bit like one note. He's like, well, my friends are going, so I'm going, which is, I think, probably accurate for teenagers.
I didn't feel he was necessarily cold, but I feel like he is struggling with his own demons in such a way that even though he was giving this heartfelt speech, it was still hard for Ali to connect that with him, or to connect that to himself. Because he even admitted that he kept things from him so that he wouldn't have to deal with it. But in doing that, he doesn't feel as strongly, right? So the kid doesn't feel strongly about his religion.
Ouch.
And so that's, I think that was honestly a really well done scene for that reason. But it's also an example, and this is, of people going through painful things without connecting with other people. And this is definitely a Mike Flanagan theme, I would say, not just in this, but in others, other of his creations. And but I do think Rahul Kohli does a great job, other than the accent part. He tries really hard with the accent, though, and it is like I wonder, like, there's just like moments when he just can't do it, and he just like sort of like roams around a word in a very funny way. So it kind of makes me laugh.
Whatever you do, don't go on Twitter and tell Rahul Kohli that this is a slow burn show, because he has kind of raged out on people. Not raged out, but he's like, you're wrong. I don't care who you are. You're wrong.
I don't think it's that slow of a burn compared to some other things, honestly, because this is what episode. I mean, they reveal certain things. Though, as an aside, I rewatched the oneer that we were talking about with the scene with all the cats on the beach, and it is so Jaws. But the funniest thing is, which I totally forgot to talk about last week, was that they're hoping that it's sharks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that would mean that the fish are back. So that's also hilarious. Sorry. But, I don't think, that something's out there. We know that something's happening. And this isn't that many episodes of a series. So I do think that they progress the show quite a bit. But I do think that they do spend a lot of time on interactions between characters and things like that in ways that other shows of this nature wouldn't. So I think that maybe for some others it feels like a slower burn than it actually is.
I think that's why the flashback scenes or the confessional kind of framing doesn't bother me so much, is because I do appreciate how much it moves the story forward. I think there's a lot of shows these days that are kind of like have forgotten, like they think the mystery is the point.
Right.
And I think you can trace a lot of this back to Lost, where J.J. Abrams basically said that his whole thing with Lost is just to perpetuate the mystery as long as possible to keep people invested in guessing. Yep. And what I love about this show is like stuff happens and like the story moves forward because of the stuff that happens. And when you're starting to like guess certain things, the show is just like, okay, you've guessed that, like, Father Paul is actually Father Pruitt, Monsignor. So let's just get that out of the way and show you exactly what happened to him so we can move on to the next action in the story, which I do like.
I agree with that too, Kyle. And I like the fact that they haven't really been hiding too much, including the fact that everybody who's been taking communion has been drinking vampire blood. Like I can't, that was fairly easy to guess in the first couple episodes. Yeah. And then we get a really nice kind of like everything's great montage to Neil Diamond. I think that was Neil Diamond.
Yes, it was.
And like that's clearly the apex of everybody's happiness in this show, and it's only going to go down from here. Because
I think you can also guess that because it is narrated by Neil Diamond song. That is like foreshadowing. Come on. I'm teasing.
I don't know the lyrics well enough to
No, I'm just teasing because it's Neil Diamond. That nothing good could come of it.
Nothing good can come afterwards.
Yeah.
Uh,
But
yeah.
anyway, no, it's true. And the montage was great in showing that. I also have to give kudos to whoever was doing the makeup because it's very subtle. And so you have townspeople just looking slightly less tired. And as you know, as you pointed out, the Riley's mom takes, she isn't wearing her glasses and the dad's back pain is gone. And, of course you've got Lisa, which is more dramatic, but you have people like who are taking communion having kind of subtle changes. And I think that they did a really great job at portraying that. It wasn't just like, hey, let's take off all the old makeup and slap a wig on them or take a wig off,
Yeah.
like
I
they
mean,
did it.
I think there was a fairly heavy hand on the makeup at the beginning of this series because they had to show that progression.
Maybe.
And in the case of like Mildred Gunning,
Yeah.
Sarah Gunning's mom, it was pretty thick. I don't know what that woman's going to look like at the end, but I feel like it might be like a 20-year-old under there but when we're done.
Bravo. It is a 20-year-old under there, I think. But anyway, no, but I think that they did a nice job at showing this kind of progression and what's going on in the town. And also for a town that's so like just heartbroken over so many things. Like they're they basically have had nothing to look forward to. Nothing is going well. And they go from that to basically, I don't want to say like religious mania, but that's kind of what it feels like, to something more positive, something that, is being given to them, their perception by Father Paul and by their belief. And that they do a nice job at showing how this progresses and how it could progress so quickly.
You mentioned religious mania, and one thing that I think is interesting is the contrast between that mania and Catholicism, because I think you had a little discussion on this last week or last, when the first two episodes, but the kind of sermons are increasingly non-Catholic feeling to me. They feel much more kind of like tent revivalist Methodist.
That is exactly what they are.
And it, my impression of Catholicism is that it's very much built around kind of set structures and routines, and so you have specific kind of steps that you go through with each sermon, and you maybe even have kind of similar themes and masses that get read, and that extends to the investigation of miracles, as has been made famous by many horror films and other works in the past. So none of what's happening here is playing out as it probably would in a Catholic church that was in a more populated area, but because they're stuck out on this island in the Crock Pot without much contact with the outside world, like none of those kind of structural elements of the Catholic Church can come into play. So it's interesting to me. They're kind of like, Father Paul is increasingly non-Catholic in his approach, or kind of like
well, and that's one of the things that I think is striking. And I also think it's somewhat of a commentary, because they are cut off. They are in this little community and they can do whatever they want here. And I do think that you find with certain religions and certain communities that this sometimes is the case. Even though they're supposed to be following a specific thing, they sometimes can do, in this case, they're vulnerable to the influence of Father Paul and what he's teaching, because they are a very isolated community.
Part of that isolation allows Bev Keane to do this horrible thing in the classroom when it seems like Sheriff Hakim has asked for a meeting to discuss the fact that Ali came home from public school, with a Bible that had been given to him.
And her whole argument is terrifying, and again, amazing dialogue, and you could see how it happens.
I really dislike. Obviously, she's made to be disliked, but I really dislike the fact also that Erin is not able to talk over her. Nobody in that room can stop her once she starts spouting, and I really want someone to punch her in the face.
I think the thing I love about that scene is that it does feel like it could genuinely go either way with the rest of the people in the room until she kind of gets a good head of steam behind her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're not all like, not all the parents are totally against the sheriff's position, but she kind of is able to persuade them around to her way of seeing things just by kind of rhetorical force.
What is shocking to me though, because maybe it's because we've only seen a couple of people's opinions of her, but the negative opinions, like maybe other people feel differently about that her, but I can't imagine that they do. But we've heard negative opinions about her from Joe, from Riley,
Aaron.
from Aaron. And you can get a sense that Riley's mom isn't too much of a fan either, so I can't, like, it to me it feels like I don't know that she would have the weight to be able to push, to swing around, basically, in this case, to throw around, because I do think that the community has her number and they are resentful of her and do understand that they got basically scammed by her. So I don't know that they would have, like, I think that the way the scene went was fine. I just don't fully believe that they would have supported her because she's bananas.
Well, I would say not everybody in the room was actively supporting her, even at the end of the rhetorical steam engine, because not everybody's clapping. There's a shot of, the sheriff sitting there looking fuming, and a few other parents also not joining in with the applause. And the applause is mostly coming from, there's three people behind the sheriff who are applauding, and the mayor and his wife. And it's also very telling that the secular power in this community is the sheriff and the mayor. Those are the only two people we even know about who run things, quote unquote.
Right.
And they're completely outmanned, or like outgunned by Bev Keane. And so what she's doing is breaking secular law by putting Bibles in public school classrooms, or making children go home with them, or offering them, or reading scripture, for fuck's sake.
I know, in class, right?
And yet there's nothing anybody is going to be able to do about it.
Right. And I will say, like, have either of you ever lived on an island before? Because it is like a very
England.
specific. Well, I lived on a little island in, like, just for like a summer before I went to college, and was not like, just was there like probably about like 4 or 5 months or so before I went off to college. And I will tell you that even during that short amount of time, there is a very even, and I would have been considered an outsider because I'm an interloper just working there, but there's a very specific way those communities work. And in this case, I think, there is sort of like an idea that it's such a small population, and while Bev is spouting and people might not totally agree with her, she's still the louder voice, or people just don't want to like cause controversy. So even though they might agree with the sheriff, they may not necessarily speak up. And so, but I don't know, given it seems, and maybe that is the point, is that like these people all have these doubts about her, but maybe they're not going to ever confront her for this reason. I don't know.
And by the end of the next episode, she is using her voice. I don't know if this is a superpower, but she's convincing people to do things that are completely insane by the end of the next episode.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so in a way, like, this is the lesser of her miracles.
But back to the sort of tent revivalist feel, I think that's exactly kind of the point, and how different it is from the Catholic Church, because Catholicism is very much about belief without seeing, if that makes sense. Like you need to believe in that miracle. There is a very specific set of activities that happen surrounding mass. It is very staid, and it is quite frankly very boring. Sorry to any continuing practicing Catholics out there.
I think there's a comfort in the boring.
It's a comfort in it because it is a routine, but also, and then even in sort of declaring somebody to be a saint, there is a very specific way they go about it. And, there is not this sort of, this mania, this would all be frowned upon. This is very much against what they teach. And there is, this is a very different part of a different type of belief. You might have people talking about miracles, but they're definitely not showing them to you. Like even having the whole, like in the prior episode, even having him ask her to stand up was so like not it's so not okay, quite frankly. And you saw the way everybody felt about it, and then she did. Like that is very much like tent revival, evangelical um kind of showmanship almost. So we see this kind of almost go into a frenzy on the island. And then to your point, Stuart, the fact that there's only like a few people, we've only seen people going to this church. Like we know the population of the island is what, like 160, something like that.
They've said dozens. I don't even know if we have a number.
But there's definitely people not going to the church. So we don't see as much of them. We just see sort of like our main,
Yeah.
we see that the church is filling up, but it's still not like necessarily everybody on the island. So that's also kind of an interesting thing to think about. Like it's a big part of the population of the island, but it's not everybody. So it's kind of, I almost wish that they had shown a little bit. We know a few people that don't necessarily buy into it, but we don't see like a huge group of these people kind of talking about what's happening with our crazy neighbors and their miracles, right?
I was also glad that Riley in one of their AA meetings challenges, or at least questions, the priest, Father Hill, Paul Hill, like, hey, you must have known that she could walk when you asked her to get up, because if that hadn't worked out, you would have been like run out of town. And you know, Hill just explains it away kind of with that hand wavy religious nonsense. Excuse me. But as an atheist, I can say that because I'm channeling Riley. But I was glad at least that he was there, and he's been a good challenging voice to the mania, or even just like regular, normal, boring.
Well, yeah, and what we do know, as the rest of this episode shows us, is that he did know that she could walk because he's been healing her with this blood. So It's not, he makes it as if he's like, oh, I just knew, and it was something that it's like, so he's basically lying to Riley about about what actually happened, which isn't shocking, but like
there's a question about how much he really knows, and I still have this question until the end of the next episode, I guess. But like certainly at the end of this episode, he comes home from the AA meeting, I guess, and is like throwing up blood everywhere and appears to die.
Yeah.
Right, and you're like, oh damn, that's that then. But then he pops back up, and at that point I'm like, I don't know that he's had these kind of symptoms before. Is this a new development since he's been on the vampire blood train? I assume it's new to him, but he's still, and then maybe I'm going into the next episode, still the next day is like, oh, I'm going to go and give mass to Mildred Gunning because it's good for her. But I'm like, is he losing his mind? Like he's clearly going through some stuff that he's not enjoying. And yeah. What does he know? And how much is he being compelled by some unseen force? But I'm kind of curious about, like, does he still think this is the best for the community, or is he lying to himself and everybody around him?
Well, and I also think it's, part of when he does die in this scene is that, like, I actually thought he had been poisoned because he looked a lot like the dog with the foam coming out of his mouth and stuff. So I was almost thinking, I thought maybe something would come that Bev was actually testing him or something. But that's not, I guess, what is happening. And I do think that it's a questionable whether he thinks that this is good for the community. I think that he's trying to rationalize and process what has happened to him in the way somebody, who would, like, nobody's gone through this before, but when he kind of goes through his confessional, you can see how he gets there. So I think that ultimately he thinks that he has been blessed, even if it means, but I think that allows him to brush away the darker side of all of this. I think in his heart of hearts, there's some things that he is troubled by. And then definitely, and I think that this again is deliberate, uses specific examples from the Bible to justify why it's okay. And and I don't know, we can probably go into the confessional piece now to talk about that, but like,
I think Paul is not as guilty of justifying horrible things with the Bible as Bev is, because she continues to do it.
Right, but he's justifying it because of something specific he has gone through in this case with his restoration to youth, which I think would turn anybody into some kind of, I don't know, like, I think anybody would be like, whoa, I'm like 50 years younger.
Go ahead.
Yeah, AJ, I think you're totally right in that I do think that he's a true believer. Like basically, I, I don't think he's having to struggle to justify what he's doing. And in fact, there's some horrible things that are going to happen in the next episode that I think he's kind of mostly, uh, they're not happening on the timeline that he wanted them to, but I don't think he's fundamentally upset
Mm.
by them, because I do think that he basically believes very, very strongly that he needs to share the gift of this angel with the town. Like, I think that's his kind of motivating force. And so, any ethical qualms that he has, he's able to either rationalize or he doesn't even have them in the first place, is how I read his
Mm.
character.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it's fascinating, and I am looking forward if we get to know more of his thoughts on this, like how much he knows, how much he's feeling about things like guilt, or if it is just completely subsumed by fervor. I know we need to get onto this next episode, but I also wanted to say, like, or question, or pose the question to you two. This is the first episode where we see the monster kind of in all its glory. It's still a little bit shadowy. There's the scene
Mhm.
in the tomb with Father Pruitt. What do you guys think? What are these? This is the monster reveal. What do we think?
I mean, I think that it was appropriate if you're trying to make something seem like an angel, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like with Father Paul talking about, I did love the narration here in these flashbacks where you see how old he was and how confused he was, and I loved the idea that this community thought that they were doing, a good thing to send him on this trip, but didn't understand that he was suffering from dementia. And it's, if you've ever dealt with anybody with dementia, this is exactly, he's kind of, a lot of people try to pretend like they're okay because they're embarrassed that they're not, or they're feeling scared that they're not okay. And this is exactly what's going on here. And he's surrounded by people that don't necessarily really know him. So this is believable in that he would get lost. And especially for somebody who has the beliefs that he has, and then to end up in this weird place in the desert, and he's in Jerusalem, and he gets saved by this thing. And then, of course, he's like, well, angels are scary because that's what the Bible says. Everybody's scared of them. And that's kind of like, but it looks enough like an angel, like it's got the wings and everything like that. It's horrible. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
scary thing. And I thought that the makeup, I liked the coloring of it. I thought like it definitely looked like this thing that could live in the desert. I mean, I want to know more about it. In fact, that's sort of my one thing. Like, I want to know more about this thing. And was there a religion based up around it? Was this like, how did it get there? Like, I want to, I want to know all the nitty gritty. So I didn't get necessarily all of that.
I love that whole final scene in the tomb, or
Mhm.
the buried church or whatever it's supposed to be. I think, it's so appropriately scary with, him lighting match after match and the two
Mhm.
eyes just like kind of beaming out of the darkness curiously at him, like, ooh, what's this? Um, I think the creature is exceedingly scary, and I love the design of it, and I also find the way that it feeds to be very uncomfortably sexual, which I also
Yep.
think is deliberate. But there's something very tender and about how it kind of caresses people as it's drinking their life force. So I think it is appropriately disturbing and impressive at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I thought it was a extremely impressive piece of prosthetic CG. Who knows? I'm not sure exactly. It was, but there was that one shot where he's like talking about how it's an angel, and there's the halo behind it, and it's just sitting there still after it's fed, contemplating, I guess, whether it was going to give him its blood, which it does. Spoiler alert. And I thought that was an amazing little just shot, and like and paired up with Linklater's narration. I agreed, like his voice over these scenes are also kind of what made those really work. So cool. Yeah, monster is revealed. We get more of it in like kind of almost a comical way in the next episode, at the end of the next
I
episode,
know.
but it's comical but not, right, because some terrible things happen, but it's
Yeah, but it is kind of comical too.
So should we move on to Lamentations? Is there anything else in Proverbs that we need to discuss?
No, other than to say, there's definitely just to the point where, whether this is definitely some of Pruitt feeling like he's bringing a miracle back, but I do feel like the creature is influencing him. There's definitely something going on here. So that has to be noted because I think that also influences him in certain ways later on. But
Yeah, he describes like coming back to the States with this thing as like he would travel and then it would fly to him. And he wasn't sure if it always would, but it did. And yeah, you get the impression that he like just kind of got hooked on it after a while.
Like a drug.
Yeah.
So that is not shocking given that he's now so much younger. I also, the transformation from, when he wakes up out of that tomb is just kind of amazing.
Mhm.
And with the sun coming down on him and everything and the creatures behind him, I thought that was a great shot.
So Lamentations is a super depressing episode, in part because there's a lot of like, oh, miscarriage is like a major theme here, even though it's not miscarriage, it's something else. It's you're a vampire. I don't know what like how exactly to categorize what's happening to Erin Green in this episode, but her pregnancy has been this central thing about her character. It's why she came back to the island. It's why she like slipped into this comfortable groove of what her mother used to do in the school and where she lived and everything.
Well, and it's also why, she was able to leave an abusive relationship. So,
yeah.
And just that it's like incredibly heartbreaking. And not, in the way that they sort of do this is really well done and really awful. Just to witness it. And, but it also allows these fantastic scenes between Erin Green's character and Riley, which are definitely like really good exchanges. And then to contrast that with everything else that's happening on the island. So, we went from the last episode, which definitely had this sort of more positive, upbeat aspects of what's happening on the island, and then this turns kind of dark because I think it's pretty clear, or like to me it was very clear that what was happening to her, what has happened to her, is because she's been drinking the blood, and that this is like another effect. And we see that the priest died of it last time, so it can't be necessarily all good. So it's not kind of shocking that this would happen. But
and the blood sample that Dr. Gunning has on the countertop, which starts like I can't even imagine how she could have responded to that. Of course, she's constantly being distracted by the fact that her like supposedly bedridden mother is like bouncing all over the house now, and now looks more like a 20-year-old than an 80-year-old.
Right. But again, like wouldn't you think that the doctor would say, hey, there's something weird going on with your blood? Like something. It just seems a little bit like she might have told Erin, hey, I don't know what happened here, but your blood is burning in the sunlight, so maybe you should put on some sunscreen or something.
So yeah, Dr. Sarah is one of the only additional to Joe Colley, Riley, Sheriff Hakim, and Ali, some of the only characters with speaking roles who we don't see take communion. So right. I'm trying to also just to keep track of who isn't drinking the blood, and it's a fairly small number of main characters.
I think that Erin's loss of pregnancy, I guess is the best way to put it, is super heartbreaking and also a very logical. Having set up the rules of the world and what the blood does to you, it's a very logical extension of that. So, I was impressed that the show kind of went there so quickly. I do think that they made it a little bit more confusing than they had to by never, if I can remember right, never showing Erin taking communion in the past, because I was doing the same thing you were doing, Stuart, kind of keeping tabs once it became clear that there was something about taking communion that was going to be helping people. Like, okay, who have we seen take it, who have we not? And I could not remember a scene where they explicitly showed her.
I don't think that they showed her actually doing it, but they showed her in church, and I think they showed her in line waiting.
It's just surprising considering she has kind of one of the earliest, like after Liza, one of the most dramatic effects of it that they wouldn't include just like a shot of her
Yeah.
gulping it down in a prior episode.
That might be, Kyle, why they made such a huge deal about Riley going to church but not taking communion, was because everybody else in there was going to be doing it.
Yeah.
And,
Maybe
and since
right.
yeah, so I mean, maybe that's like a cheap way of getting away with it without having Kate Siegel actually do communion on camera.
But yeah, I thought that was fascinating. HA, you kind of mentioned like the conversations between Riley and Aaron that take place as a result of this, and that's kind of where I think Flanagan's monologuing gets the better of him a little bit, because those went on.
Yeah, I'm there with you.
Well, so I was going to jump into that, but I didn't want to like show my hand too much. But yeah, and this is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of the tendency to hit everybody over the head with a very specific thing that he's trying to get across. And I don't think it needed to be this long, and I don't think it needed to be this heavy-handed. So that, and I think you could have shown the connection between them, and I think you could have shown all the things that he was trying to do without sort of like to me an editor was needed here. So that was like kind of this was the part where the pacing was just really, to me, just really long, and like, okay, why is this going on so long? I think we get it, right?
Yeah.
It does feel self-indulgent from a writing perspective to let this go on as long as it does. And then Riley also is like, she tells him this really heartfelt, heart-wrenching story about like her mom, her abusive husband, the baby, bringing her all back here. And then he's like, yeah, it reminds me of myself. And he talks about his own issues for a minute. And I'm like, you're not supposed to do that.
That's the weakness of this whole way of writing characters, is that you actually miss out on the ability to build character and build relationships through kind of back and forth communication,
right?
Because it doesn't feel like two people talking to each other. It feels like on stage when they'll have two they do this a lot in stage productions, where like one actor will be all the way on one side of the stage.
That's exactly
all the way on the other.
Yes.
And they're kind of like both having similar revelations, but they may not be in the same physical space or truly talking to each other. That's what it feels like with the kind of like back and forth way that this is shot. And there's almost no even cuts to reaction shots from the other person, because that it would just feel comical to do so, because the conversation's been going on so long. So I definitely think that's the weakest part of the whole series is this tendency to have the characters just
and it struck me as being so strange, and the way it went on so long, I was like, is one of them imagining this? Like, because it felt like they weren't even in the same room with each other. So I didn't know if this was some delusion one or the other was having. And that's not what it was. It was just what it was, but it just seemed very odd. But yeah, and and unfortunately this tendency does continue a little later. But on to other revelations in this episode. We've got, the whole sort of continuing vampirism of Father Pruitt. And this I thought was well done in that he's like, he's definitely feeling more effects than he was before. Like, he's very sunlight sensitive now, to the point where he's like, really, he's not able to tolerate sunlight. There's definitely, and you can see him suffering with it, and he doesn't know quite what's going on. So he's still trying to rationalize it. And then Bev actually figures out through this very blurry photo, I guess, on the wall, or she admits that she knows that he is Father Pruitt and not Father Paul.
And through the end of last episode and this one and that picture on the wall, we now have this like inner cadre of collaborators, of vampire collaborators, but they're all doing it for Catholicism. Yeah. And that's the Mr. and Mrs. Mayor and is it Sturge or Sturgis, the like island
Sturge,
the island handyman. And none of them really seem really that into it. I mean, Sturge even talks about seeming scared of Father Hill later, or Paul later on in this episode, when Bev's like, is he doing okay? And he's like, none of us wanted to get close to him, because they all watched him freaking reanimate at the end of the episode yesterday. So I find it, I mean, I'm glad that there's a little bit of a slide into what they end up having to do later, which is dispose of a body. But it's like an insane thing to think that these guys are just like, oh, yeah, okay.
I get that the mayor and his wife would be the most on board, considering that it was their child who was miraculously healed. And, none of these folks seemed like the brightest bulbs in the box to begin with anyway. So, you have kind of the self-delusion of the mayor going all the way back to the scene with all the cats on the beach. I think that the rules of vampirism in this world are kind of interesting, where you have, Father Paul, Father Pruitt, whatever we want to refer to him going forward, Monsignor has been drinking the blood for some time, and it's been making him younger, but he was not truly a vampire until he died and was resurrected by the power of the vampire blood. And so that's going to be interesting to see later how that all works, because there's now kind of a rule for when you are affected by the vampire blood versus when you're kind of like fully quote unquote a vampire.
That's a really good point. And I have been curious, like, how many of these people are savable now? Like, is Erin going to die a vampire, or can she be brought back? Or if you stop drinking it at some point, do you not have those those kinds of Father Hill shakes, or his weirdness that he has, certainly in this episode?
The other thing that occurred to me while watching this, and because it does seem weird, especially for, like, I agree, like the mayor and his wife, that makes sense because they feel very grateful about Lisa being healed, but Sturge seems like kind of an odd choice about why he would be sort of so on board with this. And one thing I thought was, and this is sort of to the rules of the world, is that maybe because they've been drinking this, they're a little bit more malleable, because they are holding the same sort of blood from the creature. Although that's
a good point. I mean, because we don't know, and we don't. That's part of back to where Father Hill is, despite the fact that he's suffering now and going through all these horrible things, and can't go to give Mildred her mass until after dark, because now he's basically a baby vampire. Like, and he still thinks that this is the best thing for her. And so to me, I'm like, all right, is this
vampire? Now I want to see that movie.
Or yeah, definitely. Like Boss Baby. But it's so yeah, there's a lot of questions. And I think maybe this is actually good storytelling and not really explaining if they are compelled or if they're just doing it out of mania. I think that's actually kind of an interesting question that I don't need it to be answered necessarily, but maybe it will be later. I also want to point out that Riley has an X-Files poster on his wall.
Yes, he does. I've noted this. And
there's a obviously, it's a scene of him talking to his mom, and she was in the X-Files, and she's like looking past him to the poster, and I'm just like, yes, pump my fist.
I know, like a little bit of meta there.
There's another question that does not, to my knowledge, get answered firmly, which is, and HA, I think you alluded to this a little while ago, like, we never really find out exactly why Father Paul died in the mayor's house or whatever. And I do think that it was because of the poison. I think either Bev poisoned him kind of to check him and see whether he was truly a vampire, because she does bring him like water and food at some points.
And he doesn't drink. That's right, because he like doesn't want to eat the soup she brings.
Yeah, or
because he wants blood.
The other thing that I've like kind of been wondering is, she's been poisoning all of the like island fauna, and as we've seen already, the vampire has eaten or drank the blood of a lot of cats, and presumably other small creatures scurrying around. And so I wonder whether some of the poison made its way into the vampire blood, and Monsignor's been drinking the most vampire blood.
Okay.
That's another thing that's left a little bit open-ended, which is whether he was poisoned either intentionally or accidentally, or whether there is something about the vampire blood that is in and of itself eventually
toxic.
Toxic. Yeah.
Curious. The
Well,
1080 can does make a reappearance during the Neil Diamond montage last
it
episode.
does. Well, to show that which we all knew she had it, but so but then there's like the really big scene during this whole thing where, um, Joe makes his
his redemptive arc is complete.
Yeah, like so he's done his, he got confronted by Lisa, and we do see him sort of struggling with sobriety, but he's made his appearance these AA meetings, which is a big deal. We've seen him sort of making good on his, like, he was really like truly had hit bottom, and he's trying to come back. And so this is like one of the biggest tragedies, and honestly, this is part of why I do think Father Paul is either being influenced or this is the story arc where I think he is trying to explain away things that he should realize are very dark things in terms of what's happening to him. But again, a very good scene between him and Father Paul. Like Joe kind of comes across Father Paul in a very big moment of weakness. We get the sense that the angel hasn't been coming around or is missing for a bit. So Father Paul is definitely transitioning into a more like he needs like blood, and he is feeling those urges. And even Joe recognizes something addictive about what Father Paul is doing. Like he kind of makes a joke like,
I've been there.
Been there, all that kind of thing. And this scene between them is really, again, a really tough scene. And the guy who plays Joe is incredible.
When Father Paul holds out his hands for that hug, I'm just like, oh my God, that's a death hug. You can see
know,
it.
right? Right. And Joe is like, and even the moment when he realizes that it's not going where it should be going is pretty rough.
Right,
but it was well done.
All right, I'm gonna go.
It's really rough that he's conscious for it all. It's so sad, because he has just kind of like had a moment of triumph. And I was a little bit hard on Rahul for his accent, but I think that he is wonderful in that scene in the grocery or whatever, where Joe's obviously standing by the case wondering what he's going to do, and the sheriff's just kind of like, what kind of night am I going to have, Joe? You tell me. And he's like the perfect combination of like knowing and tough, but also not directly attacking. And I like that interaction a lot. And then Joe leaves without buying anything, which is such a huge triumph for him. And then it's so tragic that he immediately
has his brain sucked dry.
And becomes a Slurpee. Yeah,
this episode has two instances of characters being like, I'm going to go talk to Father Paul, and it going extremely badly for them.
Right. And in this case, I mean, this is a pretty rough scene. And, and even the horrible part where Father Paul's like, oh, I'm proud of you, Joe. Oh, and you did this great thing. And then he just eats him.
He doesn't. I don't think he means to, obviously, because at first he apologizes, right? And it's not like the serial killer going, "Oh, sorry, I'm going to have to eat your liver." It's more like, "Oh, damn, I didn't know this was going to go this way." But he's overcome by his compulsions.
Yes, and
while Joe can overcome his addiction, right. Father Paul cannot.
Yes.
Yep. And then not the great, but it is the scene where the body is discovered with by the mayor and Bev and Sturge, and Bev's quick clean. Bev must just be a cleaner for the mafia or something, but she's just like, all right, this is what we're gonna do, and then you're gonna
get rid of all these people here for mass.
And their looks on their faces are incredible, but they do what she's saying, which is why I do think there has to be something happening.
She's so unfluttered or unflapped by when he holds his hand out to the sun and it burns. She's just like, okay, yeah. So this is God working through you or whatever.
But she's also like, all right, this is what we're going to do. Like, she's got a plan, and she's very fervent in her beliefs, and enough so that I guess these other people are going to go along with the cover up. But the cover up is so brutal, and they're sitting there like, I mean, it is a brutal scene. There is like blood washed across the floor. He is covered in it. There is no question about the fact that he is involved in this, and that something very strange is happening. And so I do think that this was a well done scene. But again, the actor who plays Bev is incredibly, like, she's just unlikable. And even in this sense,
I mean, we're talking about a woman who poisoned a dog for
like
kicks,
she's unlikable,
you know,
and
like...
and but she's getting things done. And so you can also see how Father Pruitt is now somewhat dependent on her, and I think that that's kind of what she wants too, because now she's got a secret.
Yep. It's also interesting to me how much Paul Hill, Father Pruitt, bounces back after dark.
Mm-hmm.
He, like, when Riley goes to that AA meeting that night, after the day of cleanup, I guess, at the father's house, when he looks over and, like, the door's locked at first, he looks over at the rectory. I think that's the name of the house where the dude lives, right? And he's standing on that porch. The way he's standing is so predatory and disturbing. I really like that just that shot. And then he kind of like snaps out of it and walks over and starts talking normally. And then he's fairly, alive and almost normal during the AA meeting, except that he tells a lie that Riley is convinced means that everything is, nothing here is what it seems. But when I hear that, all he said was Joe Colley's gone to visit his sister. He doesn't say gone to stay with her and they're going to go and do things. I think that it is acceptable vernacular to say, I'm going to go visit my grandparents and then go to the cemetery.
Right. Well, and I think that's part of why Riley goes, because I think he's trying to give him sort of the benefit of the doubt.
He's already told his mom that Father Hill's a liar. Like, that's fighting words in his house.
It is. But I think he still was like, even when he went to talk to Father Paul, like, was, hey, is there an explanation for this? Like, why did you lie? Like, what happened? Like, he knows something, but he knows something's off. And Riley, the interaction between them during the AA session is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the doubt in Riley.
He shuts down. I love that scene. As soon as he's like, oh, his sister, and then you look at his face and it's just like the prison bars are coming down over his face. He's just like, yeah, we're done here. I thought that was great.
And then I do think that this was a great, cliffhanger of an ending of an episode, which clearly I couldn't resist moving on to the next one.
Yeah.
And you see, like, it also clears up a couple of mysteries, because Riley goes in to confront Father Paul and sees, like, him putting the blood in the decanter.
Well, sees the vampire in there.
And sees the vampire. Sees the vampire, but the vampire dressed up with the hat and everything.
with barefoot. That was like it was kind of just funny that he just kind of comes in, puts up a quiet finger, and then stomps over to the altar. And the way that they did the Foley work for his foot falls, I thought was really interesting. Good. Like, this is a great massive creature, or something about the way his feet sounded in that room was really monumental.
But he also has a great physicality and, like, stride to him as he comes across the room. There's, like, something about his posture and the way that he walks that is very kind of, like, heavy and ethereal at the same time. And you do get the impression of a lot of power from him. I love that shot where, the camera's panning back and forth and then you just kind of find the vampire there dressed in the human clothes out of focus in the background. It's super creepy, and it clears up the mystery of who Riley saw on the beach in the first episode.
Yeah, but that scene, I think, was manipulated even more to make the vampire look unrecognizable.
Yep.
Because like in that scene, it almost looks like a thin man, like it's weirdly skinny. And maybe it was then, maybe because it's been drinking people like Bowl, the island drug dealer, and all those cats. Maybe it's filled out a little.
But also Father Paul's reaction to seeing Riley there, and he's like, it's almost like, oh dear.
Oh, whoops.
I love that. I love that in this show where everyone's given the opportunity to just, like, as to good effect and bad, to, like, be so big and showy with their acting. Like, my favorite moment of acting in the whole show, one of my favorite moments of acting, like, in anything I've seen recently, is just that like little
Yeah,
that
it's
Father Paul
amazing.
gives when he sees Riley there. It's perfect. It's just like, okay, things are going to be a little different than I expected, but it's okay.
Yep.
Is kind of how I read it. And then, the vampire obviously like kind of swoops over to jump on Riley and start drinking his blood. And Father Paul just gets up and with like just a little bit of resignation and a little bit of like everything is fine, just
Yep.
closes the door. It's so
really
chilling. I love it so much. Yeah. I just thought Hamish Linklater in
So
this
good.
scene was just absolutely perfectly modulated.
I feel like
just
he's
thought
been
it was
killing
great.
it the whole series so far. And I get it, HA, why you couldn't stop here and went on. I
know.
super get it. I wanted to also, but I'm now my mind is just spinning. I'm like, so this show was kind of about Riley, I thought, because he was in the cold open. But now he's done. Is he out, or is he going to be reincarnated like Father Hill? And so I'm just like, all the possible permutations from here. I'm really excited kind of to see. I mean, I would be fine if he's out of the show in a way. Like, all right, so that was his arc, and now the other characters have to pick up and take it over, and it's going to be about Sheriff Hakeem and Aaron and Dr. Sarah, and they're going to be like the hero. I'm hoping. I don't know. We'll see. I'm very excited.
All right. Well, we'll have to talk about that next time. Do you want to close out?
When you guys are done having knowing looks at each other,
that was a knowing look, if ever there was
There was
one.
a knowing silence right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Do we have anything else to add for Lamentations? I will actually just add that Proverbs and Lamentations were both kind of name dropped in these two episodes. I don't remember if Genesis and what was the second episode's titles were name dropped in the episodes, but I thought that was a little odd. Because Lisa's like, do you know what a proverb is, Joe Collie, you dummy? And then Aaron Green's mom had been needle pointing really depressing quotes from Lamentations onto furniture.
Yep.
So okay, those things happened. We will be back next time.
All right. I think that sounds good.
Okay, so next time join us again for 5 and 6. That'll be up Gospels and Act of the Apostles. And hit us up on Twitter at Reanimated PCast, or on email at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, and show notes with links to things like that GalaxyCon Q&A with the cast of Black Summer on our podcast website at reanimatedpodcast.com.
And until next time, ciao.
Thank you, and toodaloo. And Kyle?
I don't think I have a closing. Yeah, I don't know if I'm involved in this part.
Perfect.
See you,
Nailed
everybody.
Okay.